My name is Eileen, and I am 62 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family meant unconditional love and acceptance. I thought that when you welcomed someone into your family, you embraced them with open arms, regardless of their bank account or social status. 3 years ago, when my husband Harold passed away, I discovered just how wrong I could be. What happened at that family dinner changed everything I thought I knew about love, respect, and what it truly means to have dignity. Before I share what happened that evening, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and please hit that like button if you have ever felt judged by family. Now, let me tell you about the night that changed everything. For 35 years, Harold and I built what I thought was a beautiful life together. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, where we raised our son Michael with love, laughter, and the kind of values that seemed to matter back then. Harold worked at the local manufacturing plant, and I stayed home until Michael started school, then worked part-time at the community center. We were not wealthy by any means, but we were rich in the things that counted. Sunday dinners around our kitchen table, family game nights, and the kind of conversations that lasted until midnight. Michael grew up to be everything we hoped for: kind, hardworking, and respectful. He earned a scholarship to State University, graduated with honors, and landed a good job at an accounting firm downtown. Harold and I were so proud. We thought we had done everything right. Then Harold had his stroke. It happened on a Tuesday morning while he was getting ready for work. One minute, he was humming his favorite tune while shaving, and the next minute, I found him collapsed on the bathroom floor. The paramedics worked on him for what felt like hours, but by the time we reached the hospital, it was too late. My Harold, my partner, my best friend for 35 years, was gone. The financial reality hit me like a second wave of grief. Harold's life insurance was modest, and after the funeral expenses, medical bills, and settling his debts, I was left with very little. The house that had been our sanctuary for decades suddenly felt like an anchor I could not afford to keep. The property taxes, utilities, and maintenance costs ate up most of my small pension from the community center. 6 months after Harold died, I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold our family home and moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment across town. It was clean and safe, but it felt like living in a shoebox compared to the spacious rooms where Michael had learned to walk and where Harold and I had danced to old records on Saturday nights. To make ends meet, I took a part-time job at the public library. 20 hours a week, helping people find books, organizing the children's reading corner, and occasionally helping with computer classes for seniors. The pay was not much, but it gave me purpose and kept me around people instead of sitting alone in my apartment, dwelling on everything I had lost. It was during this difficult transition that Michael met Victoria. She was a junior partner at a prestigious law firm downtown, driving a sleek BMW and wearing clothes that cost more than I made in a month at the library. When Michael first brought her home to meet me, I tried my best to make a good impression. I cleaned my little apartment until it sparkled, bought flowers for the table, and cooked Michael's favorite meal from scratch. Victoria was polite that first visit, but I could sense her taking inventory of everything around her. Her eyes lingered on my second-hand furniture, my outdated kitchen appliances, and my carefully mended curtains. She smiled and said all the right things, but there was something cold behind her perfect white teeth that made me uncomfortable. The first real sign of trouble came at Emma's 6th birthday party. Emma was Michael and Victoria's older daughter, and Victoria had insisted on throwing the party at the exclusive country club where she was a member. When I received the invitation printed on thick cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering, my heart sank. I knew this was going to be unlike any birthday party I had ever attended. I spent days agonizing over what to wear. My wardrobe consisted mainly of practical clothes suitable for working at the library and running errands around town. Finally, I settled on my best dress, a navy blue one that I had worn to Harold's funeral. It was respectable and clean, but when I arrived at the country club and saw the other guests in their designer outfits and expensive jewelry, I felt like a sparrow among peacocks. The party was elaborate beyond anything I could have imagined. There was a professional photographer, a clown who probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a cake that looked like something from a magazine. Victoria flitted around in a silk dress that probably cost more than my car, making sure everything was perfect for her social media photos. When it came time for presents, I watched nervously as Emma opened gift after expensive gift. Designer clothes, electronic gadgets, toys that came in boxes bigger than my coffee table. Then came my turn. I had spent weeks working on a handmade doll for Emma, complete with a tiny wardrobe that I had sewn myself. I knew it was not fancy, but I had put love into every stitch, just like my own grandmother had done for me when I was Emma's age. Emma's face lit up when she saw the doll. She hugged it close and thanked me with genuine sweetness. But Victoria's reaction was immediate and cutting. She took the doll from Emma's hands, examined it with obvious distaste, and said loudly enough for several other parents to hear, "How thoughtful, Eileen!" Though we generally prefer store-bought gifts with receipts in case there are any safety concerns. The words hit me like a slap. Safety concerns, as if I would ever give my granddaughter something that could hurt her. Several other parents looked uncomfortable, and I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Emma reached for her doll back, but Victoria had already set it aside with the wrapping paper, as if it were trash to be disposed of later. That night, I called Michael and tried to talk to him about what had happened. I was careful not to sound like I was attacking Victoria, but I needed him to understand how hurt I felt. Michael listened patiently, then sighed heavily. "Mom Victoria just wants the best for the girls. She comes from a different background than us. Her family has certain standards, and she is trying to maintain those for Emma and Sophie." Standards. The word echoed in my head long after we hung up. What kind of standards made a handmade gift from a loving grandmother seem inadequate? What kind of standards valued the price tag more than the love that went into creating something special? Over the following months, Victoria began making what she called suggestions about my visits with the girls. Perhaps I could call before coming over to make sure it was convenient. Perhaps I could consider updating my wardrobe for family photos. Perhaps I could contribute money instead of homemade gifts for special occasions since the girls were getting older and had more sophisticated tastes. Each suggestion felt like another small cut, and gradually I began to pull back. I visited less frequently, called before every visit, and started declining invitations to family events. It was easier than constantly feeling like I was not good enough, like I was some kind of embarrassment that had to be managed and contained. But Emma and Sophie, bless their hearts, never made me feel that way. They still ran to me with hugs whenever I visited, still called me to tell me about their day at school, still asked when Grandma Eileen was coming over again. Their love was pure and uncomplicated, unlike the adult world of judgment and social climbing that Victoria seemed determined to create around them. Then, on a chilly October evening, Michael called with what he said was great news. "Mom, we want to take you out to dinner this Saturday, somewhere really nice." Victoria suggested it herself. She wants to celebrate some good news we have to share, and she specifically asked me to invite you. I was surprised and cautiously hopeful. Maybe Victoria was finally ready to accept me as part of the family. Maybe whatever good news they had to share had put her in a generous mood. Maybe this was the fresh start I had been hoping for. The restaurant Michael had chosen was called Le Bernardin, one of those places downtown where you needed reservations weeks in advance and the waiters wore bow ties. I had never eaten anywhere so fancy in my entire life. The building was all glass and steel with valet parking, and a doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. I spent the entire week worrying about what to wear. My funeral dress seemed too somber for a celebration, and most of my other clothes were clearly inappropriate for such an upscale establishment. Finally, I used some of my grocery money to buy a new blouse from the discount store. It was not designer quality, but it was new and clean, and made me feel a little more confident about fitting in. The night before the dinner, my friend Martha called to check on me. Martha had been Harold's co-worker's wife, and we had stayed close after both our husbands passed away. She was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my struggles with Victoria. "I don't know, Aileen," Martha said after I told her about the dinner invitation. "Something about this doesn't sit right with me. Victoria has never shown any interest in including you before. Why the sudden change of heart?" I wanted to believe the best. I wanted to think that Victoria had finally realized how much her coldness was hurting not just me, but her own daughters, who clearly loved their grandmother. Maybe she is growing up, Martha. Maybe becoming a mother has taught her something about the importance of family. "Just be careful," Martha warned, "and remember what Harold always told you about keeping your dignity no matter what." Harold. Even 3 years after his death, I could still hear his voice in my head during difficult moments. He had always been my anchor, my source of strength when the world felt too overwhelming. "Hold your head high, Aileen," he used to say. "Nobody can make you feel small unless you let them." Saturday evening arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather that matched my nervous mood. I took extra care getting ready, styling my hair the way the young woman at the salon had shown me, and applying just a touch of the lipstick Emma had given me for my birthday. Looking in the mirror, I thought I looked respectable. Not glamorous, but dignified. The taxi dropped me off in front of Le Bernardin at exactly 6 o'clock. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see other diners at their tables, all of them looking like they belonged in a magazine spread about successful people living their best lives. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked through the heavy glass doors. Michael spotted me immediately and came over with a warm smile. He looked handsome in his dark suit, every inch the successful professional. "Mom, you look great," he said, giving me a hug that felt genuine. "The girls are so excited to see you." Emma and Sophie rushed over, wrapping their arms around my waist with the kind of enthusiasm that only children can muster. "Grandma Aileen, we missed you so much," Emma exclaimed. "Mommy said we are celebrating something special tonight." Victoria approached more slowly, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I made in 3 months at the library. She air-kissed my cheek in the way that wealthy people do, careful not to disturb her perfect makeup. "Aileen, how nice to see you. I love your blouse. Very quaint." The word quaint hung in the air like a small insult wrapped in false pleasantry, but I chose to ignore it. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a celebration. I was determined to focus on the positive. The hostess led us to a table near the window with a view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. The table was set with more forks and spoons than I knew what to do with, and the menu was printed on paper so thick it could have been cardboard. I opened it carefully and immediately felt my stomach drop. The prices were astronomical. Appetizers that cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. "Don't worry about the prices tonight, Mom," Michael said, noticing my expression. "This is our treat. Order whatever looks good to you." Victoria picked up her wine list and began studying it with the intensity of a scholar. "Money is no object tonight," she said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "We are celebrating after all." I ordered the least expensive entree I could find, a simple chicken dish that still cost more than I had ever paid for a meal in my life. Victoria, meanwhile, ordered the lobster special and a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly utility bill. As we waited for our food, the conversation flowed surprisingly well. Emma told me about her school play, where she was going to be a tree in the forest scene. Sophie showed me a loose tooth that was hanging by a thread. For a few minutes, I almost forgot about the tension and just enjoyed being with my granddaughters. Then Victoria's phone rang. She answered it without apology, even though we were in the middle of dinner. "Oh, Jennifer, what a coincidence. Yes, we are at Le Bernardin. Family dinner." She paused, listening. "Actually, why don't you and the others come over and say hello? I would love for you to meet everyone." My heart began to race. Victoria was inviting her friends over to our table, and I had a sinking feeling that this was not going to go well. Michael looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Emma and Sophie continued coloring on their children's menus, oblivious to the adult undercurrents swirling around them. Within minutes, a group of 3 women approached our table. They were all dressed like Victoria in expensive clothes and jewelry that caught the restaurant's soft lighting. Victoria stood up to greet them, her voice taking on that bright artificial tone that people use when they are performing for an audience. "Everyone, I would like you to meet Michael's family," Victoria said, gesturing grandly. "This is Michael, my husband, and these are our daughters, Emma and Sophie." She paused, and I could feel what was coming next like a storm on the horizon. "And this is Michael's mother, Eileen. She works at the library." The way she said "works at the library" made it sound like I was some kind of charity case they had taken pity on. Her friends smiled politely, but I could see them taking inventory of my discount store blouse and my modest jewelry. One of them, a tall blonde woman with teeth so white they looked artificial, actually looked me up and down with obvious assessment. "How lovely," the blonde woman said in a tone that suggested it was anything but lovely. "It must be so fulfilling to work with books." Victoria launched into a conversation with her friends about mutual acquaintances and social events, effectively excluding me from the discussion. Michael stared down at his plate, and I could see that he was uncomfortable but unwilling to say anything that might upset his wife. Emma and Sophie sensed the tension and became quieter, their earlier excitement fading. When Victoria's friends finally left, the atmosphere at our table had completely changed. Victoria seemed energized by the encounter, as if proving something to her friends had given her new confidence. She began talking about financial responsibility and the importance of not being a burden on family members. "It is so important to live within your means," she said, cutting into her expensive lobster. "Some people never learn that lesson, and they end up dragging everyone around them down." I felt like she was talking directly to me, even though she was not making eye contact. My chicken suddenly tasted like cardboard, and I found it difficult to swallow. Emma looked confused, and Sophie had stopped eating entirely. "Victoria," Michael said quietly, "maybe we should talk about something else." But Victoria was on a roll now, emboldened by her friend's visit and the wine she had been drinking. "I just think it is important to be honest about these things, Michael. Pretending that problems don't exist doesn't make them go away." I set down my fork and took a deep breath. "Is there something specific you would like to say to me, Victoria?" She looked at me directly for the first time all evening, her eyes cold and calculating. "I think you know exactly what I mean, Eileen." The tension at our table was now impossible to ignore. Other diners were beginning to glance in our direction, sensing the drama that was unfolding. Emma had tears in her eyes, and Sophie was clinging to my arm as if she could somehow protect me from whatever was coming next. I reached for my purse, intending to at least pay for my own meal. I had brought enough cash to cover the chicken dish, and I did not want to feel any more indebted to Victoria than I already did. But as I pulled out my wallet, Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Don't embarrass us with your food stamps, Eileen." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had never used food stamps in my life, even during the most difficult months after Harold's death. The accusation was not just wrong. It was deliberately cruel, designed to humiliate me in the most public way possible. "I don't use food stamps," I said quietly, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "I was simply trying to pay for my own meal." Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. Oh, please, let's stop pretending, shall we? We all know what your situation really is. I could feel the eyes of other diners on us now, and my cheeks burned with embarrassment. Michael was staring at his hands, still refusing to defend me. Emma was crying openly, and Sophie had buried her face against my shoulder. Victoria, please, I said, hoping to salvage something from this disaster. The children are upset. But Victoria was beyond reason now, standing up from her chair with the righteous fury of someone who believed they were finally telling the truth that everyone else was too polite to speak. I've had enough of this charade, she announced, her voice carrying across the restaurant. You don't belong here, Eileen. You never have. You're just a burden on this family, dragging us all down with your poverty and your pathetic attempts to fit in where you clearly don't belong. The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet now, the only sounds being the soft crying of my granddaughters and the clink of silverware as servers tried to pretend they were not listening to every word. Then Victoria did something that I will never forget as long as I live. She raised her hand and waved it in the air, calling out across the restaurant in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Excuse me, could you please send security over here? We need someone to escort this pauper away from our table. The word pauper echoed through the elegant dining room like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned in our direction. I felt as if the entire world had suddenly focused on me, on my discount store blouse, and my modest jewelry and my second-hand purse. For a moment, I could not move. I could not breathe. I could not think. I just sat there, frozen in my chair, as tears began to fall down my cheeks, and the reality of what was happening crashed over me like a wave. Emma was sobbing now, reaching for me across the table. Don't take Grandma away, she cried. She didn't do anything wrong. Sophie was clinging to my arms so tightly that her little fingernails were digging into my skin. I don't want Grandma to go, she whispered. A security guard appeared at our table, a young man who looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt. Ma'am, he said gently, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. I looked at Michael one last time, hoping against hope that he would finally find his voice, that he would stand up and tell his wife that she had gone too far. But he just sat there staring at his plate, his face red with shame, but his mouth firmly closed. Something changed in me in that moment. Maybe it was the sight of my granddaughters crying, or maybe it was the memory of Harold's voice telling me to hold my head high. But instead of slinking away in shame like Victoria expected, I slowly stood up and wiped the tears from my cheeks. You're absolutely right, Victoria, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent restaurant. I am not wealthy. I drive an old car, I live in a small apartment, and I work at the library 20 hours a week to make ends meet. Victoria looked surprised that I was talking back instead of simply leaving. The security guard paused, sensing that something had shifted in the dynamic. But there is something you don't know. I continued, feeling strength flow back into my voice with every word. When Harold died, he left a substantial trust fund for Emma and Sophie's education. He wanted to make sure his granddaughters would never have to worry about college tuition or graduate school or any of the opportunities that money can provide. Victoria's face went pale. What are you talking about? I am the trustee of that fund, Victoria. Harold left it entirely up to my discretion how and when the money would be distributed. He wanted me to observe how the girls were being raised, how they were being taught to treat others, especially those who have less than they do. The restaurant was so quiet now that you could have heard a pin drop. Even the servers had stopped pretending to work and were openly listening to our conversation. For the past 3 years, I have been living modestly and working at the library, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what kind of people my son and his wife really were. I wanted to know if they would love and respect me regardless of my circumstances, or if their affection was conditional on my ability to contribute financially to their lifestyle. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Several diners at nearby tables had actually turned their chairs to face us, no longer even pretending not to listen. "Tonight, you have shown me exactly who you are," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You are someone who would humiliate an elderly woman in front of her grandchildren. You are someone who would call security on a family member for the crime of being what you consider financially inferior. You are someone who values money more than human dignity." I reached into my purse and pulled out my credit card. Not the debit card connected to my modest checking account, but the platinum card that I had kept for emergencies. "The only pauper here, Victoria, is someone so poor in spirit that they would treat another human being this way." I handed the credit card to our stunned server. "I'll take care of the entire bill tonight, including a 30% tip for having to witness this shameful display." Victoria was staring at the platinum card as if it were a snake that might bite her. "But you work at the library?" she stammered. "I volunteer at the library," I corrected her. "Because I believe in giving back to my community. Because I believe in the value of education and helping others. Concepts that seem to be foreign to you." A few people in the restaurant actually began to clap. The sound started soft, but grew louder as more diners joined in, creating a wave of approval that rolled across the dining room. I turned to my granddaughters, who were still crying, but now looking at me with something like awe. "Emma, Sophie, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that how much money someone has tells you nothing about their character. I want you to remember that true wealth is measured in kindness, compassion, and the way we treat others, especially when we think nobody is watching." I signed the credit card receipt with a flourish, leaving a tip that was probably larger than most people's car payments. Then I stood up, straightened my discount store blouse, and prepared to leave with my dignity intact. The security guard stepped aside without being asked, and several diners nodded at me respectfully as I passed their tables. One elderly gentleman actually stood up and tipped his hat. Michael finally found his voice as I reached the restaurant's entrance. "Mom, wait!" he called, jumping up from his chair and hurrying after me. I turned to face my son, this man I had raised with love and values, who had sat silent while his wife humiliated his own mother. "Yes, Michael. I'm sorry," he said, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. I don't know why I didn't." "You didn't defend me because you were afraid," I said sadly. "You were afraid of making waves, afraid of standing up to your wife, afraid of choosing between your mother and your comfortable life. I understand that fear, Michael, but I'm disappointed that you let it control you." Behind him, I could see Victoria still sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands. Emma and Sophie were standing beside her, looking lost and confused. "The trust fund is real," I told Michael quietly, "and it's substantial. But after tonight, I need to think very carefully about whether Victoria is the kind of influence I want in my granddaughters' lives. Values are more important than money, and children learn more from what they see than from what they're told." The weeks that followed were difficult, but in a different way than the grief and struggle I had experienced after Harold's death. This was the pain of rebuilding, of rediscovering who I was when I wasn't trying to please people who would never truly accept me. Michael called me the next day, apologizing repeatedly and begging me to give Victoria another chance. "She was drunk," he said. "She didn't mean any of it. She's mortified about what happened." But I had seen Victoria's true face that night, and I knew that alcohol didn't create cruelty. It just removed the filters that usually kept it hidden. "Michael, I love you," I told him. "You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I cannot pretend that what happened was acceptable, and I cannot put myself in a position to be treated that way again." Victoria herself called a few days later, her voice carefully controlled and professional. "Eileen, I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." The apology felt rehearsed, like something she had practiced in the mirror, or perhaps even run by her lawyer friends. There was no real emotion in it, no genuine recognition of the pain she had caused. "I appreciate the call, Victoria," I said, "but forgiveness and trust are two different things. I can forgive you for Emma and Sophie's sake, but trusting you again is going to take time and evidence that you've truly changed." The truth was, I wasn't sure she was capable of that kind of change. People who could publicly humiliate a family member usually had deep-seated issues with empathy that went far beyond a single bad evening. Emma and Sophie, bless their hearts, didn't really understand what had happened that night, but they knew that Grandma Eileen was sad, and that somehow their mother was responsible. They began calling me more often, sneaking phone calls when Victoria wasn't around to ask when I was coming to visit again. "Mommy says you're sick," Emma told me during one of these calls. "Are you going to get better soon?" It broke my heart that Victoria was lying to the children instead of taking responsibility for her actions. "I'm not sick, sweetheart," I told Emma. "Sometimes adults have disagreements, and it takes time to work things out, but I love you and Sophie very much, and that will never change." Through all of this, Martha was my anchor. She listened to me vent my frustrations, celebrated my moment of standing up for myself, and helped me process the complex emotions that came with setting boundaries with family members. "You did the right thing," she assured me. "Harold would have been so proud of how you handled yourself that night. You showed those people what real class looks like." I also found unexpected support from strangers. Word of what had happened at Le Bernardin had somehow spread through the community, and I began receiving kind notes and cards from people I barely knew. The librarian who supervised my volunteer work told me that several people had called specifically to praise my character and work ethic. "What you did took tremendous courage," she said, "and it's reminded a lot of people about what really matters in life." The incident also led to some wonderful new friendships. I met Eleanor, a widow in her 70s, who had witnessed the entire scene from a nearby table. She sought me out at the library the following week and introduced herself. "I've been thinking about what you said that night," Eleanor told me, "about how we treat others when we think nobody is watching. It made me realize that I want to be more intentional about kindness in my own life." Eleanor and I began having coffee together regularly, and through her, I met a whole group of women who valued character over cash and friendship over status. For the first time since Harold's death, I began to feel like I had a real community again. After 2 months of minimal contact, Michael suggested that we try family counseling. "Victoria is willing to go," he said. "She really wants to make things right." I agreed, but only on the condition that Emma and Sophie be allowed to see me regularly, regardless of how the counseling went. "My relationship with my granddaughters should not be conditional on your wife's comfort level," I told him firmly. The counseling sessions were revealing, though not in the way Michael had hoped. Victoria participated, but it quickly became clear that she saw the problem as my inability to understand her high standards rather than her own behavior. She spoke about her upbringing, her family's expectations, and the pressure she felt to maintain a certain image. "I never meant to hurt Eileen," she said during one session. "I just think there are appropriate ways to behave in certain social situations." The counselor, a wise woman named Dr. Patterson, gently challenged this perspective. "Can you help me understand what about Eileen's behavior that night was inappropriate? From what I'm hearing, she ordered modestly, tried to pay for her own meal, and responded to insults with dignity." Victoria struggled to answer without admitting that the real problem was my financial situation, not my behavior. It became clear that she fundamentally believed that wealth was a measure of worth, and no amount of counseling was going to change that deeply held conviction overnight. After 6 sessions, Dr. Patterson suggested that Michael and Victoria continue couples counseling while I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my granddaughters. Sometimes, she told me privately, the healthiest thing you can do is model good boundaries. Those little girls are watching how the adults in their lives handle conflict, and you're showing them that it's possible to stand up for yourself with grace. As spring arrived, I found myself in a surprisingly good place. My relationship with Michael was slowly healing, built now on honesty, rather than his attempts to keep everyone happy. Emma and Sophie visited me regularly, and I was able to shower them with the love and attention they deserved, without walking on eggshells around their mother. The trust fund remained intact, waiting for the girls to reach college age. I had decided to add provisions that would require them to complete community service and demonstrate good character before receiving their inheritances. Harold would have approved of that addition. Victoria and I maintained a polite but distant relationship. She was civil when necessary, but the warmth and acceptance I had once hoped for were clearly never going to develop. Surprisingly, I found that I was okay with that. I had spent too many years trying to earn love from someone who was incapable of giving it freely. Looking back on that terrible night at Le Bernardin, I realized that it had been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to find my own strength, to remember my own worth, and to stop accepting treatment that was beneath my dignity. Harold had always told me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the experiences that teach us the most about ourselves. I learned that respect isn't about how much money you have in the bank, but about how you treat others, especially those who can do nothing for you in return. I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone, but that the alternative, accepting mistreatment for the sake of keeping peace, is far more damaging to your soul. Most importantly, I learned that true wealth has nothing to do with designer clothes or expensive restaurants or platinum credit cards. True wealth is measured in the love of people who accept you as you are, in the satisfaction of work that gives your life meaning, and in the peace that comes from knowing that you have lived according to your values, even when it was difficult. Money can't buy class, and poverty isn't a character flaw. The richest person is the one who knows their own worth and refuses to let others diminish it. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in life's most challenging moments. Remember, sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply showing who you really are. Thank you for listening, and may you always remember your own worth regardless of what others might say or think. Until next time, keep your head high and your heart open.